we have created or crafted our message. Now, what communication tactics or communication media and tactics are we going to use to send the message across to the people? That is what we are going to look at today. Now, I'm reminding you that the goal of any communicating activity is to inform, to persuade, motivate, and achieve mutual understanding. So, whenever there is communication, you would realize that the goal of the communication is falling under one of these. This is basic, from your level 100. So this is a gentle reminder. Do not forget. We have talked about in the previous video, which is crafting messages, we talked about how you can be an effective communicator, what you need to know. So I would not belabor the point over here. Again, I think we talked about message being appropriate, being meaningful, and all that. Communicator should know the exact objective sought. Now, this is good. So, if you want to be a good communicator, what we are saying is you should know the exact objective. That's what we were talking about earlier, a few seconds ago, when I said each communication has its objective. When you are communicating, know the objective. Is it message exposure? Basically, you want more people to be aware of the message. Is that your objective? Is it the accurate dissemination of the message? Is it acceptance of the message? Do you want to get people to accept the message? Sometimes you may not want people to accept the message. That is not your objective. Maybe your objective is to get the exposure. Are you looking at attitudinal change? Or are you looking at change in overt behavior? All these are objectives that you may have in communicating. Now, I'm reminding you of these because in the next few slides, when we are having a conversation, I want you to remember that at any point in time when you are implementing your communication tactics, you should have these in mind, that you have an objective. You have what you are seeking to do. And that is what will inform the tactics and the media that you are selecting, the communication media that you are selecting. So please do not forget that. Don't do anything haphazardly when you are in the field, when you get your career, when you're in your careers. All right. So these are basic, yes, paying attention to the message. Basically, we are saying over here that there are some kinds of audiences. We have passive audience, where the audience do not really care or are not bothered about your message. There are active audiences, the audiences who are going to act on the message that they have received, or audiences who are conscious of the environment and are willing to take action or step. And I think you would remember these from your advertising classes too. And then we have what we call triggering events, where the audiences are neither passive or active. They are there. But a triggering event, something would happen for them to become either passive or active. More often than not, the triggering event makes them active. Yeah. So these are some of the reasons why an audience may pay attention to your message or not. Because they might be a passive audience, because they may be an active audience, or because of a triggering event. That is what will make them maybe pay attention or not pay attention. So for instance, you may have been doing, let's say, YouTube videos, or maybe Facebook. You have been talking about typhoid fever, people may not have been paying attention, but a triggering event like the Mawako issue may make people then pay attention. Or Mawako may even have a passive audience, and then that incident may trigger them to become active. Sometimes too, audiences may be active, and then something might happen, and then they become passive, either because what they are looking for has been sorted, or they get tired of maybe acting in a certain way and not being heard. So these are some kind of audiences that you would come across, so you would know how to handle them as and when need be. When it comes to understanding message, remember earlier we talked about the previous slide, we talked about paying attention to message, what makes audience pay attention to a message, and I was letting you know the kind of audiences you would come across and how it will affect how they pay attention to the message. You understand? Now we are looking at understanding the message itself. What will make them understand what you are telling them? One is effective use of language. Talking is not just talking. It is about how you arrange what you want to say, the kind of words you select, your vocabulary. So you often see that in court, where the prosecution will say, my lord, this gentleman here, this criminal here, this whatever words they would want to use here, wants us to believe that he is not guilty of this, but do not be deceived by those other words. And then the defense will say, my lord, or address the what do they call them? These people who come to sit in court and who are invited to the jury. The person will speak to the jury and say, my lord, or members of the jury, look at this family man. He works hard every day. They are all talking about the same person, but everybody has the kind of words they want to use to describe this individual, because the way you describe the individual there affects the way the jury or the judge will see the person. So the use of language is important, and writing clearly, avoiding using ones you hear every day, avoiding jargons, euphemisms, cliches. They make reading or listening to what you're saying boring. Yeah, so if you want people to understand your message, use the language effectively. If you're writing, write clearly, and all these things that have been stated here, please adhere to them. Now we're moving to believing the message. So people have understood your message. First, we looked at paying attention. Now people have understood your message. Now, what will make people believe or not believe your message? We talked about this in crafting message, the other video, which was source credibility. Who is saying what? If the source, the person or the organization is not credible, people will not believe the message. But there are variables in believability. When we say there are variables in believability, even though we are saying people will believe or not believe a message because, let's say, of the credibility of the source or whatever reason we give, sometimes it doesn't work that way. One example is the sleeper effect. Now, when we say sleeper effect, all we're saying is a message can come from, let's say, a non-credible source, and people will at that moment shun it and say, oh, this thing that this person is saying is not true. We will not take it seriously. But as time goes on, so the sleeper effect works with time. As time goes on, people get to tend to believe the message when they have forgotten. So the time makes them forget that, oh, the source was not credible. So what I'm trying to, let me give you an example. We are in 2022. So you hear a message about a certain politician that, oh, this politician is, let's say, is a murderer, yeah, or is a womanizer, or is greedy, and he has misappropriated money. You hear it today in 2022. When you hear it, you probably are hearing it from the opposing party. So you go like, of course, why wouldn't they say these things about this person? Because they also want power. So you disregard the message. But the human mind works such that even though you have disregarded the message as lies, it is still in your head that the person is a criminal or a murderer or womanizer or whatever. Now, as time goes on, 2 years' time, 3 years' time, you would still remember the message, but you would have forgotten where it came from. You're like, I've forgotten where I heard it from, but they were saying this man, the way he handles funds is no good. So now you see that the sleeper effect has taken effect here. Yeah. So you realize that even though we're saying a credible source, for instance, can affect a message, sometimes as time goes on, the sleeper effect kicks in. And some communicators know this. So sometimes they give you information they know you will not believe. They don't really care because they know that sleeper effect will kick in. Years from now, you will remember what they have said about this individual or this organization or that organization, and you would have forgotten that earlier when you heard it, you really did not believe it. And then, of course, the context of the message also affects believability, whether people will believe your message. The context, not the content, context, the surrounding environment. So just like if you are in a room and a madman enters the room and says, hey, the room is on fire or the house is on fire. Now, maybe the reason you run out is running out away from the madman, but not because you believe what the person is saying. Yeah. So the context can also affect believability of the message. I'm going to give this example where, let's say, you harm someone, you do something wrong to someone, and the person is bitter about it, as normally in relationship, and then you go like, oh baby, you know I love you, and the person, oh, you are just saying it because I'm angry with you. And you often see this happen in, normally when I'm reading about stories about people and their experiences, you realize, for instance, cases of rape. An individual is raped, and then after the event, the perpetrator says, you know I love you, or I will marry you. Now, in this context, how believable is this message? Chances are this person is telling you these things so that you do not go and report the incident. You understand? Aha. So the context of the message can affect believability of the message. And then the audience's predisposition is also a factor. I mean, when we say predisposition, what the person already believes in or where the person already stands can affect whether the person will believe your message or not. So if somebody is a Christian, maybe a Presbyterian, and a Jehovah's Witness comes, or an Adventist comes and says, do you know that this, that, the chances that the person will believe you is low because they have their predispositions. Yeah. So basically, and it creates cognitive dissonance within them. So what they know and what you are saying, it conflicts. And normally, when people feel like that, what do? They shun the new information and hold on to what they already have in them. Sometimes, too, when an unexpected spokesperson comes to talk on a matter, it affects believability. So everybody expects the minister of, let's say, tourism to come and talk about tourism. If somebody else comes to talk about it, maybe probably no rank, the chances that people will believe what the person is saying is lower because of the nature of the spokesperson. So if a student comes to stand before a general student population and says, we are increasing school fees to this amount, the chances that people will believe is low because, what are you talking about? Who are you? We do not expect such a message to come from you. Right. And then involvement also affects believability. When people are involved in whatever message you are communicating, when it is, as we go along, you will come across some examples of involvement, two-way communication where people are taking part in whatever it is that is being discussed. People tend to believe it the more. Now, you have made them understand, you have made them believe you, and now you have to make them remember your message. How do you do that? Repetition is one such way. Yeah, so you give them the same information using different channels and different ways. So today it is in a song, tomorrow it is in a news item like hard news, another day it's soft news, it is woven into soft news, but it's the same message. Repetition. And when you do that, it sticks. Another reason repetition sticks is there is noise in the environment. So by noise, noise as a communicator, not necessarily somebody playing loud music, but anything that could distort your message is noise. So there could be noise if you just send a message once. Something may not have been clear. So as you repeat, things become clearer. And it also prevents messages from being lost, entropy in the long channel. This one hears a message and gives it to this one, and then this one also gives it to this one, and then before you know, the message has been diluted. But when you keep repeating it, the chances are that all relevant stakeholders would hear the message for themselves and take decision. Yeah. And that's why it's also important to, when you're either delivering a speech or writing out a speech, at the end, you summarize your main points. That's why you hear people say, so ladies and gentlemen, in ending today's, I would like to remind you today, I have talked about this, I have talked about that. So you recap what you have discussed for the day so that it would help draw people's attention to what they have learned or they have heard. And then repeating your phone numbers on web addresses several times, all these things help in getting your audience to remember your message. But how do you get them to act? Now you realize that we are looking at different, we are traveling through message being received, message being understood, believed, but now we are talking about acting on the message. So now they believe you. How do you get them to act on the message? Now there is a 5-stage adoption process before any individual adopts an idea, a product or a service. These are the stages that the person goes through: awareness, interest, evaluation, trial, and adoption. Now, when we say awareness, this is the stage where, of course, the individual becomes aware of the existence of your product, service, or your idea. So if you ask the person, oh, have you heard about this? The person will say, yes, I have. The person is aware, but really not much interest. So let's use one example that you people are all familiar with, and then we'll run that example through the awareness, interest, evaluation, trial, adoption, all those 5 stages. Let's say let's take an iPhone for instance. The first stage of the adoption process, you would have to be aware. That is, you know that there's a kind of phone called an iPhone. Yeah, but that's the awareness in level. That's it. Now, at the interest stage, the person, as the name goes, has interest. So the person wonders, this iPhone, what's the processor speed? What is the space or RAM that the phone has? What's the picture quality? So the person wants to find out more. If it's an organization, what are their beliefs? Where can they be found? So basic information about your organization or about your product. So in this case, the product is the iPhone, trying to find out more information about it. Then the person will move to the stage called evaluation stage. Now, at the evaluation stage, the person is comparing the iPhone to other similar products. Or if it's an organization, other services. If it's a bank, for instance, this is the stage where the person will say, okay, so this bank says they have, Standard Chartered says they have A, B, C, D kinds of accounts, and this is the discount they give me, and if I'm going for loan, this is this. The person is now evaluating, what about Zenith? What about commercial bank? What about, the person is comparing and contrasting to decide whether your product or service is even worthy of further attention or worthy of trial. Now, the trial stage is where the person gets to see how it works. So, if, for instance, it's an iPhone, the person can go to an iPhone shop and then you see how they display it in these holders. You can just browse through and see, so this is how it feels like when it is touched. Oh, okay, nothing spoil. All right. Let me see how it rings. Oh, okay, so this is a ringing tone. Oh, okay. So this is how the camera quality is like. So you are going through the trial stage. Yeah. Sometimes some of you may not have a Netflix account now, because you are like, why would I spend this amount of money on this? But you have gone through awareness, interest, evaluation, and now you are at the trial stage. You can ask your friend, Charlie, cool, can you share with me your Netflix password? They share it, and then you'll be using it for a while to see whether it is even worth it before you go to the next stage, which is the adoption stage. Yeah. So at the trial stage, that's where people go to a vehicle showroom and they sit in and they drive the car, then see how it feels, okay. So they want to test it out. That's the trial stage. And then the final stage is the adoption stage. Now, this is where you buy the product or service. Yeah. Or if it's an idea, this is when you adopt it. You say, okay, now I am a homosexual. I have adopted it. Or now I am an atheist. Or now I am a Christian. You have adopted the idea. If it's a product, you buy the product. If it's a service, you use the service. This is the final stage. Well, not final. But this is the pair, what we're seeing here. This is the final stage, adoption. Now, I'm saying it's not final because as the years go by, you realize certain things are also important. For instance, after somebody adopts your product or service, it doesn't end there. If it is, for instance, food, if it is nice, what happens? There's a repeat purchase. So if your brand is adopted and the experience of the person is not top notch, what happens is there's no repeat purchase, or they do not keep being with you. So some suggest that after adoption there is the post adoption stage where person evaluates and then decides whether there's going to be a repeat purchase. Yeah, but anyway, so this is the 5-stage adoption process. If you do not understand it, please do let me know in the comment section. Now let us come to choosing our communication media and tactics. Now, remember we earlier talked about our objectives and our strategy, communication strategy, and then I mentioned in class that we will talk about strategy, and that's where we get down to the nitty-gritty. That's where we get our hands dirty. So that is what people see. Oh, they see you sharing flyers, they see you doing this. It's like, okay, they are doing something. But people may not know the stages you have gone through, the objectives or goals behind the actions you are taking. So basically, the tactics is where you take your action itself. So you should consider your tactics in the light of your goals and objectives. Whatever tactics you are implementing, remember your goal, remember your objective, and ask yourself, are these tactics I'm employing going to work with the goals I have or the objectives I have? And as an organization, we have certain ways of doing things. Are these tactics in line with it? Yeah. So you may have an organization that is seen as, let's say, professional organization, the way they are seen in public. So maybe certain tactics that are too guerrilla tactics when it comes to dissemination of information, they might decide, because of how we are, it is not to our taste. We wouldn't. When I say guerrilla, I mean like hands down, maybe putting things in people's windshields, avant-garde kind of, in your face kind of tactics. So these are some of the things you should take into consideration when you are selecting the tactics you want to use for your campaign. And always forget, never forget that you have to consider your time and then your budget constraints, the money that you have. Now, many people, before we get there, when we say communication media and tactics, generally we have 4 categories of communication media. We have the interpersonal communication, we have the organizational media, we have the news media, and then we have the advertising and promotional media. These are the 4 main categories of communication media. Under these categories, each of them has various tactics that you can use under them. And when you read the book, as I mentioned in class, you would see how clearly a lot of these tactics have been listed and explained. So, when you look at this diagram, you'd see 2 pyramids, one upside down. That's the one on the left, has the pointed tip at the bottom, and then the one on the right has pointed tip at the top. Now, the one on the left is talking about audience reach, and the one on the right is talking about persuasive impact. What this diagram seeks to say is that when you select interpersonal communication, now you see that interpersonal communication has a wide, persuasive impact. But when you look at the corresponding color in the or under the audience reach picture, you realize that the space it has a small. What they're saying is the persuasive impact of interpersonal communication is great. That's why it has a bigger portion under persuasive impact. But the number of people you'll be able to reach with that is small. Of course, because if it is interpersonal, it means one-on-one, and you cannot reach tens of thousands of people using interpersonal communication. But the persuasive impact is very strong because you get to, face to face, explain things away and all that. Similarly, organizational media The persuasive impact is not as great as interpersonal communication, but the audience reach is greater than that of interpersonal communication, as you can see on the left diagram. So I hope you now understand what the diagram is about and what we're trying to say. So you would have to keep that in mind when you are selecting your category, communication category, or the media category. Yeah, whether you're doing advertising and promotional media, you remember the persuasive impact of advertising and promotional media is the least among the categories, but you can reach a wide audience. Now, you realize that the choice would depend on your goals and objectives. Again, I'm reminding you, if you want to create awareness of an issue, remember awareness, interest, or what we just discussed. Maybe the first stage you want people to get to is to be aware that your product or your service or your brand exists. And at that point, you may not be too interested in persuading them to get to adoption stage or trial stage or something. So you may decide, oh, let me use advertising and promotional media because it has a wider audience reach at this point. And then as time goes on, you may decide to change your media tactic. So you always ask yourself, will this tactic help the organization interact with the appropriate public? These are some of the questions you have to ask yourself when you are selecting your communication media. Yeah. So now let us look at some of the tactics you would find under the various communication media we have discussed, which is the news media, organizational media, interpersonal, advertising, and promotional. Yeah. Interpersonal. Now, it is the most persuasive and engaging, as we have discussed. The strategy of interpersonal tactic. The reason people use interpersonal media is that you can control the message. When you say you can control the message, you are able to shift and shape the message, unlike, let's say, advertising and promotional media, where when the information gets out there, or news media, where when the information gets out there, you really don't have much control over how it goes. But when it is interpersonal, you have a lot of control. It is not expensive, although it takes a lot of time. Yeah. And then you are able to make a stronger impact, as I've discussed. And then it reaches a small number of people, which is one major disadvantage of that. But of course, when you're talking about interpersonal, you are able to have a personal involvement. You're able to have a personal involvement in what it is that you're doing. So some of the tactics under interpersonal communication is organizational site involvement, where you do like a tour or open house. So now I hope you are getting the distinction. We are talking about communication media, and then we talk about interpersonal communication as one of the four categories of communication media. And under interpersonal communication, some of the tactics you can find are organizational site involvement. So tactics to achieve interpersonal communication is organizational site involvement, where you go and then you realize you can have an open house. People can come in there, you have talks with them, blah blah blah, all those things. Normally they do that with real estate. Yeah. So they ask you to come in. It's an open house. Come check the rooms, all those things. They set a date and people come in and out, and then interact with the house owners and ask questions and get their answers. So there's a personal touch to it. Audience site involvement. So audience are where the audience are, where the people are. You go there and you get them involved. So door to door canvassing, going to their homes to demonstrate whatever it is that you have to demonstrate with them. So these are all tactics. When you read the book or the PDF that I sent, you would find detailed explanations of all these in there. Another tactics of interpersonal communication, of course, information exchange, where you can do educational gatherings, product exhibitions, meetings, demonstrations, speeches. All these are under tactics under interpersonal communication. Special events, same. Now let's go to the next category, which is organizational media tactics. Organizational media. Now, when we say the media is an organizational media, I think you get it. It is message that belongs to. Media that belongs to the organization, and these are some of its advantages. So, some examples: publications, direct mail, sending it straight from the organization's email to the potential audience. Yeah. Okay. And then we have electronic mail here. Okay, so the difference between these two, normally in our part of the world, when we say mail, we are talking about email, but this direct mail over here then refers to what we call post. Yeah. Okay. Digital media, social media, but all of these are for the organization. Yeah. Okay. And then we have news media. News media is also another communication media, and you'll find that when you talk about news media, you often hear the acronym PESO, PESO, which is paid and shared and owned, the types of media that we have now. Why do we use news media, and what kind of tactics are under news media as a communication media category? When you're using news media, your primary goal is to present newsworthy information to your audiences. Normally, they are large audiences, and you would want to reach as many as you can. Using news media also helps you to be able to get third-party endorsements. Getting somebody people respect, or revere, to endorse your course or your product or service also helps push your brand. You get free publicity, but you cannot control it. More often than not, it is difficult to control news media. You cannot control what they say and how it is said. And then advertising and promotional media tactics. Under this one, you have print, electronic, out of home, promotional items. You would realize that some of the media mentioned here are also mentioned under categories. So, print, for instance, could be organizational media, where they print whatever it is out for you to read. But the focus is on who owns it, because remember, with the organizational media, we're talking about media coming from the organization itself, so the organization owns the media. But then when we come to advertising, the focus of advertising often is a third party owning a platform, and then you purchasing to send your message across. Yeah. All right. We've discussed this already. Let's see if we can round this up. I'm getting fatigued. Okay, I've talked about the earned, shared, the peso, which is when we talk about news media as a category, paid, earned, shared, and owned. Now, when we say media is paid, it means you pay, of course, to get your message out on that media platform. When we say it is earned, it means you, through your organizational activities, got people talking about it in the media. When we say it is shared, it means that the media platform is not necessarily yours, but you're sharing its ownership with other people. So you go to Facebook, when you make a post on Facebook, the post is yours. It's your property. So if somebody copies it and also goes to paste it somewhere else, people will say, hey, you have copied this person's property. Yeah. But at the same time, the platform also belongs to Mark Zuckerberg. So you realize that we are sharing the platform in a sense. That's why we call it shared media. And then owned is the one that is for the organization itself. So you realize that when you look at paid media, you would find Facebook sponsored posts because you pay for Facebook to show to people. But under shared media, you still find Facebook there because it also has a characteristic of being a platform that you share ownership in a way with other people. What is this trying to signify? What is being said here is there are various news media, basically 4 over here, and what we're saying is you need to take into consideration each of them and its strengths and weaknesses before you embark on using it. Because, for instance, when you use owned media, of course, you're able to control or the message. You are able to give exactly what you want people to hear. You give it at your own pace and all that. At the same time, owned media does not carry the authenticity. I really am getting tired. The authenticity that shared media would have, or earned media would have. Because if people are finding information on your website, basically they will say, of course, what do you expect them to say about themselves? It is their website. But if it is on a shared platform or a shared media, or it is earned, people look at it twice. Like, oh, okay, that might be, you know. So that is for you to know. All right. So if you have any question, please do let me know. You can type it in the message box or the comment section, and I will respond to you. Maybe I'll make a video of answers to all the questions that I get under the post.